Hi everyone and welcome to the FilmDirt Lounge, and welcome to the third part of my little look back into the Alien series. The first two films, I scored them both 5 stars, both fantastic pieces of cinema. And unfortunately, this is the point in the series where it starts to take a little downwards dip, but maybe not too much. So for this review, I'm going to take a look at Alien 3. And I'll watch the special edition version which came with the Alien Anthology set. So as far as I gathered, this is the same as the old assembly cut, as they called it, from the DVD quadrilogy set. And for the special edition, they went back and re-recorded some of the maybe poorly recorded dialogue that maybe would have been re-recorded had they used it in the theatrical version. And there's a few other audio fixes, I believe, a few small trims, and I think they reworked the theme music in a couple of scenes I noticed, maybe. So the film is 20 odd minutes longer than the theatrical cut. Now this film is really interesting in that the director didn't have a say in the final release. David Fincher was a new director at the time, and they probably showed him a little bit of disrespect by not trusting him. Apparently he had a very bad experience working on this. The studio probably thought they had to babysit him because it was such a big tentpole movie series. And after seeing this longer cut of the movie, you do wonder what would a Fincher have included in his theatrical cut. Because none of these cuts, neither of them are his cuts. He didn't return to supervise these editions, and I hear he doesn't even talk about them in interviews. Seemed like it was a really bad experience for him, and I'm on his side, I think. When you spend that long working on a story, it's a huge period of your life to invest into being creative, and to have the studio making decisions over your head and then taking the project away from you, I'm not really surprised he disowned it. Ironically, he went on to become a super talented filmmaker with some fantastic movies under his belt. So, the theatrical cut. I remember seeing this film on TV many times, and because I loved the Alien movies, I would always sit down and make a point of watching it. Even though it is the original shorter version, I always found it ultimately quite boring. The first two had an excitement about them, even though the first one was slower as well. There was always something that kept you invested. This one, I did enjoy it in part. And all those scenes later on in the second half where they're running through the tunnels, that just seemed to go on a little bit too much. And yet it's interesting the first time you watch it because it looks like some kind of 3D ride, doesn't it, the way they filmed it. But really it's a long sequence which, again, just isn't that interesting. But if you look at the film overall, the whole planning and the story they actually went with at the time, I don't think it's one the audience could really invest in anyway. This is a prison planet. And there's not many prisoners here. I think they said 25 or 29 prisoners. So it's not like Alcatraz where there's millions of them. They're all the same character to me, mostly. They've all done horrible things, and that is mentioned a few times. There's no one really to root for apart from Ripley. But I can kind of see the direction they possibly thought would be more interesting at the time. And it's kind of like Quantum Leap, isn't it? Where our central character goes into hypersleep and then appears somewhere else you didn't think she would, then goes to hypersleep again and appears in a completely different place again. And it's ultimately quite sad because when you think about it, Ripley never resolved her situation since the first movie. She thought she killed the alien in that one, and then in the second movie wakes up 57 years later. Everything as she knew it has gone, her daughter's gone through her entire life and then died. And then she goes back into hypersleep and wakes up with an alien queen inside her. So she's just a condemned soul going from galaxy to galaxy. And that's what I find interesting about the film. It's the parts that aren't really in the film. It's just the overall story that is kind of set up, but not executed really that well. So the prisoners have got religion as a pastime. There's nothing else here, no weapons. And they forage and farm their own food. We seem to have only one doctor on site and one company man, played by Charles Dance and Ralph Brown, joining Sigourney Weaver returning, along with Lance Henriksen later on in the film, and a splattering of British actors we've mostly seen in other films. And like I referred earlier, a lot of these guys are quite unlikable, as well as mostly looking the same. That scene where they're bringing the dead ox into the kitchen area, or butchery area, it's hardly a kitchen by the looks of it. It's absolutely disgusting, doesn't it? And the dialogue here is, I think it was just a little bit too boisterous and shows how excited they are that they've learnt word that there's finally a woman on the planet. Probably can't believe their luck, can they? So that scene with the dead ox was one of the new additions. It looks like he just keeled over and died while it was working, because they've got them all pulling and dragging large pieces of equipment out there. It probably just keeled over and died, and the alien face hugger from the wreckage just looked like it crawled inside while it was still warm. And it made me wonder, what kind of face hugger is this, because it looks really large when it was picked up there. A lot bigger than the ones we saw in the first two films. So presumably it's a queen face hugger. It could lay multiple aliens in every single host it finds, not just one. And that's quite terrifying, isn't it? We saw a brief shot that there was an egg inside the escape capsule, and the face hugger visited Ripley and presumably Newt as well, although I don't know what happened there. It didn't seem to, even though it broke the glass of her pod. So one of those face huggers could take out the whole Colonial Marines if it was left in your bedroom at night. And as good as that whole scene with the ox was, I prefer the dog being the host in the theatrical cut. Now, I'm a dog lover. I don't like seeing dogs hurt or in pain. But when it was writhing around in pain, about to give birth, it just gave a lot more weight to the scene. Because when they brought the ox in, it was already dead, surely. And when he's punching it, it kind of looks like a fake prop anyway. So my favoured cut of Alien 3 would probably include the scene with the dog. And those brief shots of the newborn running away, I know they cleaned it up for the quadrilogy set, but it still doesn't really look that good to me. It's good that they put it in, and they spent all that time erasing the rods from the puppet, and the performers obviously. But none of this film, I don't think, ever really got that coat of polish. Some shots look better than others, some are slightly soft, some aren't, but there's a brown filter over most of the film. And it's not really that nice to look at, even though I know we're not really looking at anything nice here. Although some warmer tones in certain scenes do look really good. So the film is up and down really. And that brings us on to the actual compositing of the alien. To me it just looks like two different aliens. Of course you've got the man in suit, and then you've got those additional shots where you do see that it's walking on all fours with hind legs, because it's great that the alien can take on the proportions of its host. But ultimately, it just doesn't look like the same animal throughout the whole film. And I get they probably rushed and didn't really get time to composite those shots of the alien as seamlessly as they wanted. But it does kind of stand out. And because they marketed these films as horror movies or horror sci-fi, you can't really be scared of something if it doesn't look like it's in that space. It just looks like a really poorly animated cartoon. And even though for the Alien anthology they did go back into this film to rework a lot of the audio, they never really spent the extra money to improve the visual effects of the alien. I can see that would be a huge investment. It's very expensive to remaster a movie. But it's a job half done here. The film sounds great, and I do like the score by Elliot Goldenthal. And they did work to incorporate his score into the new scenes. It's just spoiled that they didn't go in to improve the alien effects. That alien is the whole point of the movie. It's why we're terrified. But they probably thought this film was a bit of a lost cause really. It's been out for so long now. This is the best version of Alien 3 we're ever going to get, I think. But when you look beyond those faults, there's a lot to like about this film. The new fuller story with Golic, played by one-time Doctor Who Paul McGann, his character arc where he's a little bit obsessed with the alien, that was cannibalised in the theatrical cut, and it's a much better movie for these scenes. He ultimately lets it out again, but in the original that's kind of more vague. And if David Fincher had returned to supervise this new cut of the film, I think he would have cut it right down to, I think, just over 2 hours, with the full obsession by Golic included in the film, and possibly the birthing scene from the dog, and the shot at the end of the film, where the baby queen hatches from Ripley, would have been my ultimate version of Alien 3, because that ending shot in the theatrical cut was much stronger. We felt for Ripley, that because the company lied to her, How can they be trusted now? And I also love that Lance Henriksen, he came clean at the end, didn't he? Think of all we could learn from it. He doesn't want to kill it at all. He's basically pleading with Ripley, and she makes the ultimate decision. What a great end to what could have been a really great movie. But we can only look at the film that was eventually released. And I've been thinking of what to score it throughout this whole revisit. So for the theatrical cut, I'd have probably scored it 2 stars only. I really didn't like the film, and I really tried multiple times to enjoy it. And the special edition assembly cut, I'll score it 3.5, because I do like the film, and it's great that we get to see the Golic character objective. But still, ultimately, there's a lot of boring portions of the film. This is the natural end to this series, really, or the end of Ripley's story. However, there was another film called Alien Resurrection. I'll revisit that film next on the channel and bring you my review very soon. But for now, thank you very much for joining me for this little breakdown of a very curious film, Alien 3. Join me again soon. I'll try and see Alien Resurrection within the next few days, so like and subscribe so you catch the little alert when that review drops. It was great speaking to you. All the best and take care.